Welcome into the all-new XFL Fantasy Central. I'm your host, Rod Villagomez. You can find me on Twitter at RJ Villagomez. You can find the show on Twitter now at XFL Fantasy Cast. You heard that correct. The rebranding has happened. I know that DFS is going to be a major thing in this, but I just can't ignore the normal season-long fantasy side of this, and I know that a lot of people are going to play both. We're just going to make this the one-stop shop for all things fantasy. It is now the XFL Fantasy Central podcast, and I am so happy to be rolling this out. New logo, new look, new fresh everything. I mean, look, as much as you can change in one episode, we've completely changed in one episode. So much great content. We are going to talk to Brandon Main, the host of the Sea of Dragons podcast, all about the Seattle. I was almost going to say Seahawks. You got me, XFL. The Seattle Dragons. We're going to break down some fantasy options from those Dragons. New format, too. We're going to go team by team. I'm going to go west to east as much as I can with these podcasts, and we're going to talk to the folks that know these teams the best about all their fantasy options. So hang tight. Got a great show. We're going to talk about the new rules and what fantasy implications they may have. It's all coming up soon on the show. The new year brought us a new set of rules for football, for XFL football to be specific, and they have got several fantasy implications that they bring with them. And I'm going to tell you right now that this is probably the most, I think, dynamic of all of the changes to football. Obviously, if you have followed the rules and if you've seen the rules, I think you already know what I'm talking about. A lot of what I'm going to cover is stuff that is really groundbreaking in a way and can change a lot of the way we play fantasy football. In that the NFL, there's a rigid, structure of what to expect, and there's not a whole lot of deviation. And obviously, the way to create some differences is to award bonuses and the likes. But we've been pretty set in our fantasy football expectations. This is going to change a lot of things, the way some of these scoring plays are happening, a lot of the kickoffs that are happening, and just basically doing away with the extra point as we know it. So let's just dig in a little bit of what we're talking about. And one of the first rules that I actually do want to talk about is the kicks and the use of the kicks or the lack of the use of kicks. And this is not just in relation to the extra point tierage, which actually comes in and looms large in scoring, but also the way that the way that we're handling kickoffs. Because in the NFL, right now, as it stands, and most leagues don't have this, there's no points for return yards. And that's mainly because, again, in the NFL, the kickoff has sort of become non-existent. Kick returners now don't normally get a chance to run the ball out or to have those gigantic runbacks that we've been used to over the years. There's really no threatening kick returner that we can really point to and say, yep, that's a game changer, like we used to have even 10 years ago, 5 years ago even. The way the kickoffs are being handled now makes returning really just an afterthought. But now with the way that the lining up off of the ball and not being able to go, and the rule as it stands right now, as far as kickoffs, they talk a lot about, especially the opening kickoff, right? Where the kicker is 20 on the 25-yard line and everybody else is at the other 20-yard line. And it's crazy because they put the players closer together, and you cannot, basically it's eliminating the fair catch. I'm not going to read the rules like verbatim. If you want to know the rules, you can actually go to the XFL page, read the rules. But where this new kickoff rule is interesting is that there won't be as many fair catches in this league. Just doesn't lend itself to needing to fair catch. And when I read this rule, I immediately thought of the Canadian Football League. And I'll tell you why. Because the Canadian Football League, every kick is a live ball. So there is no downing it in the end zone for a touchback. Because if you down it in the end zone, you're giving up a point. you don't want to give up points. And so, I mean, there's very few times where you want to give up the rouge or the single, whichever you prefer. But there are times in field position battles that you will just go ahead and give up that point. But that doesn't happen very often. And so in Canadian football, you want to run that ball back. You want to take that ball out of the end zone because you do not want to give up a point. And then also there's the halo rule in CFL, which is actually a 5-yard buffer that you have to give the returner. You have to give it. Doesn't matter if it hits the ground. Doesn't matter if it's in the air. You have to give them 5 yards with which to operate to pick up that ball. If you're in that halo, you get a penalty. If it's in the air, you get a 15-yard penalty. If it's on the ground, you get a 5-yard penalty. It's called a no yards penalty. So what that does is it fosters returns. It makes you, it gives you the ability to return the ball. And what I think that these XFL rules are doing is a lot of that. It's giving the returner an opportunity to actually make a play in special teams rather than watch the ball sail through the end zone, because that's not fun. I'm tired of the NFL's kickoffs. I really wish that they would figure something out, because it just seems like you shouldn't even kick the ball off. It should just be the AAF where you automatically start from the 25 and go from there. If you're gonna make the kicking game, if you're gonna make the kickoffs that much of an afterthought, then just do away with them. They're not exciting. It doesn't. Very rarely do you get a person that runs the ball back. So why do I go into this? Well, because here's the thing. In daily fantasy for the CFL, you get points for return yardage. And I really honestly believe that if we were to open this up and if there was actually going to be an opportunity for returners to get points for return yards, that stands to benefit a lot, especially when the return game is being encouraged. So what that does is it opens up an entirely new strategy for you. Now, here's the thing, the return yards, whereas, it's mainly a yard per 10 yards in normal offensive plays, right? Running, passing, and the likes. The return is 1 point for every 25 yards. So you don't, again, it's not the normal 10 yards or 1 point for 10 yards. It's 25 but even still, if you have a receiver that is a kick returner as well, or if you're trying to go very cheap and you just know that there's an explosive kick returner on that team, and at a flex position, you can throw that guy in and have yourself good value and load up somewhere else, that opens up that possibility for you. So what I'm hoping to see is that the DFS community in XFL opens up the possibility of return yards tacked on to a player's totals. And when the leagues open up, when the actually season-long leagues open up, that's something that I'm going to be bringing to the table as well, because I feel like that is an untapped resource. And in a league where kicks are actually being returned, I think you should start getting points for those returns, because that now opens up, again, plenty of opportunity for people who may not have been rostered before, or, you think, wow, they're just a special teams guy, I'm not going to put them on the roster, that you could put them on your roster and week to week get points from them. That to me, any opportunity to add more points to your total is a good opportunity. And so if we're going to see more kicks, then I'd like to see more points awarded for those kicks. Again, because in the NFL, it doesn't really matter. There's not a whole lot of opportunity. So that brings me to, when we talk about scoring and more scoring, the point after touchdown, the extra point rule is not just a kick anymore. So here's where I go with this one too. I said it in episode 1, and I'm going to say it now. We don't need to roster kickers on fantasy or DFS. I know that there's a lot of people going to be like, oh, but field goals. Okay, look, that's fine. You keep your field goals, but I don't need a kicker, especially if there's not going to be any extra points being kicked. Then I'm not going to keep a kicker around for the off chance of 3 or 4 field goals in a game. To me, the tight end position is volatile, but the kicker is volatile too, because you see it week after week. You see guys that their team scores so many touchdowns that they get 5 points out of a week because they only kicked 5 extra points. But the team did well, but the kicker only had to kick 5 extra points. Or you get beat by somebody whose kicker was their entire offense. And you could have had a receiver put up massive amount of points, but because the kicker ended up putting up that many points, you got beat that week. And then the kicker goes back to kicking 3 points the next week. It's such a volatile position. But this extra point rule now puts a lot of stuff in play. And my question too is really, when these rules roll out and when you start looking at the effects of scoring, well, what are you going to do? Because extra points are worth 1, 2, or 3. So do you award the quarterback, on a 2-point conversion, right? The quarterback gets 2 points, the receiver gets 2 points, and then 1 for a reception if they do get the reception. So will that be the standard? And then if they go for 3, obviously, right, where there's a possibility to go for 3 from the 10-yard line, does that count for not only 1, the 3 points that you got? If you passed for that, do you get 3 points for passing? If you rushed for that, do you get 3 points for rushing? The reception, is that 3 points for the conversion, 1 point for the reception? And then since it's 10 yards, that's another point in there. So for a receiver, do you get the yards that come with that catch? So hypothetically speaking, if you were a receiver, right? If you were a wide receiver and you caught a 3-point play, that's a 5-point play right there, right? If you're counting the 10 yards for 1 point, 1 point for the reception, because look, PPR leagues are really all I love to play in, or a half point, whatever, if you want to throw a half point in there. So whatever the point is for the reception, if you're doing that, and then 3 points for the conversion, right? So that's a 5-point play. Just imagine the possibilities of a receiver, especially late in the game, and they're going for, a 3-point conversion, that they catch that's a 5-point swing and you end up winning. You talk about some major sweats in there. So, and then for defense too, right? I mean, if you're a defensive player, or if you're playing in either an IDP, which I'll bring it up later with the guest we have on, right? Brandon May of the Sea of Dragons podcast. We'll talk about this a little bit as far as defenses are concerned, but I'm almost feeling like an IDP league is the way to go if you are going to play the defenses in this, because if you're going to play in an 8-person league, right? An 8-team league, then everybody's just going to have a defense. There's really not going to be much of a opportunity for you to find another defense on the waiver wire, obviously. So I really think that IDP is the way to go. And so if, you talk about IDP, if you get one of these, if they fumble, if you throw an interception on one of these point extras, then you get those points. So let's say your guy intercepts, runs back an interception for a 3-point play. That's 3 points for you, right? Whereas an interception, that's 3 points. And then of course, if they do in the touchdown and they intercept the touchdown, it's the same. So I feel like there's more opportunity for an IDP. But that also, like I said, this extra point thing opens up an opportunity for your defensive player to get it as well. It's just insane to think about the fact that you can now get 3 points on an extra point attempt. To me, that I think might be the ultimate, tip of the cap for the XFL, because that's probably the more innovative approach that they're rolling out. Because again, the extra points being kind of boring. I mean, the conversion rate is high. Even though they moved it back, it's still high. These kickers are good. I mean, I'm going to back up a little bit and not to piss every kicker off out there, because I listen, there's no way I could kick a field goal. absolutely zero chance that I'm going to go out there and kick a field goal. It's not, especially under the pressure that they're in. So listen, they have just as much worth as anybody on that field. But for fantasy purposes, it's a nightmare. So I'm not anti-kicker. I'm just anti-kicker in fantasy. So please, kickers, don't flood my DMs with all the hate, because I love you as players. And listen, when Robbie Gould nails a field goal to beat any team, I am in love with Robbie Gould. But I just don't want to have to roster them on my fantasy team. So, sorry. That's my aside for kickers. But the thing of it is that when you break these rules down, there's a lot of opportunity for extra scoring. There's a lot of opportunity for chances to really have some high point totals. And I feel like that is good for fantasy players. And one thing, so the rule that I think everybody's most interested about, and I think this is the one where, for fantasy purposes, I don't know what to do with this one yet. I really don't. And that's the double forward pass. And let's not get hung up on the nomenclature of the double forward pass. All right. I think a lot of people are looking at it on face value and saying, whoa, the double forward pass. But really what this does is it just makes an opportunity for a trick play, a little more, I guess, less gray. Right? Whereas in the NFL, they're like, oh, but was it behind the line of scrimmage when he let the ball go? Was it in front of the line of scrimmage? They draw that line and they say, well, okay, but now let's see, where was his feet when he threw the ball? It just takes away that gray area. So now any of these passes that go behind the line of scrimmage, in front of the line of scrimmage, it kind of all encompasses it to be a pass. So what you can do now is you can not worry if you're going to flick it out to a running back or a receiver and they're going to do another pass. You don't have to worry about where your body position is. And so that kind of makes it easier for those plays to happen. Now, what does that mean in terms of fantasy, right? I mean, who's going to get the initial pass? Because again, behind the line of scrimmage, you pitch behind the line of scrimmage, that's a pitch. And then that doesn't count as any kind of pass. So if you pitch it back to the running back throws it to the receiver and the receiver gets a touchdown, it's pretty cut and dry, right? The running back gets the touchdown pass and the receiver gets the touch. So now if the quarterback tosses to the receiver and that's a forward pass, I guess I know it can't go past the line of scrimmage, so that probably just a half a yard gain. But these completion percentages or like points per completion, if you play in a points per completion game, does that count? And then does the other one count? I'm not seeing too much that will move the needle as far as from the quarterback's perspective. But what I think that does for us as fantasy players is it puts a lot more innovative play calling into play, which means there's an opportunity now for your running back or your receivers to maybe throw the ball more. I mean, I'm not sure that this is going to do too much, but we'll love to see what the play calling opens up, and there's a lot of jet sweeps that could end up turning into touchdown passes. If you get the receiver, a good receiver that maybe could have been a quarterback or was a quarterback, they run that jet sweep motion, a quick pitch and then a stop, because before you couldn't quick pitch it. Right. And then throw it because that would be 2 forward passes. Well, now you jet sweep, you toss it to the receiver. The receiver can run, a bootleg in a sense and find the receiver down the other receiver down the field. So be on the lookout for that. So now when you're thinking about drafting your receivers, think about which ones have arms. Think about which ones could get you those touchdown passes. And then, how much do you want to play for? 4-point touchdown passes, 6-point touchdown passes. If you start getting into that 6-point category, it's basically like your receiver scored a touchdown himself. So, that's going to be quite interesting. I feel like those type of situations are going to really open up a lot of great play calling opportunities and some good fantasy points for us as fantasy players. A couple other things that might impact the fantasy world out there. One of them is the running play clock, and then the 25-second clock also, which I love the 25-second clock. I love speeding up the game. As a Canadian football fan, man, that time clock, it just seems to go. Like there's no huddle up and everybody wait and then, look in again for the play. And it's just, it's such a long and daunting in between plays. It just seems like you can basically get up, get another beer and come back and then they'll start the next play. No, not so much with the CFL, not so much now with the XFL, because they've got the opportunity for the game to move faster. So what does that mean? Could mean more scoring, could mean more plays. It's definitely going to mean more plays, which leads to more yards, which leads to more points, fantasy points wise. So again, there's a lot of opportunity for you to get higher point totals, which us fantasy players love. We love watching points rack up. So I think that's going to be a great addition to the game. The 1 foot down rule, that's going to be amazing too, because now we don't even have to worry about what a catch is anymore. You get a foot down, you're good. So the receivers get some more opportunity to catch balls that they may not have been able to catch before. And then what I think is going to be the most interesting thing that we've got going on is the overtime rules, right? The overtime shootout. Because here's the thing. What does that mean for us as fantasy players? Because again, when you're scoring, you basically usually score the amount of points that you get when you score. So with this shootout, it's going to be quick. It's going to be fast. It's going to be just straight from, it's going to be the 5 rounds, right? So everybody, and the scoring is 2 points per round. So now you have an opportunity if the game goes to overtime, which they're saying they don't see very many overtime games on the horizon. But, if your receiver, if they go to the receiver all 5 times, and if he's open all 5 times, you get an opportunity for another 10 points in that overtime period. So, if they catch, and then maybe even 15 points if you point per reception, or maybe you don't give receptions in the overtime. I don't know. It's, I am glad that I am not in charge of awarding points for the for this DFS world, for this fantasy world, because I got to tell you, I'd be lost. I'd be lost trying to figure it out. But look, all I'm saying is that there's plenty of opportunity for points to be scored, for fantasy goodness, is what I said in the tweet, and I cannot wait to see who actually comes up with the concept, what concepts they come up with, and man, I'm ready to play. I am literally ready to I'm shut up and take my money, please, and let me play some fantasy XFL, because I have a feeling that if it's done correctly, we are going to be in for an outstanding product and just good times playing. So, all right, listen. No more ado. We're going to get to the next part of the show, because we have got a lot to cover with Brandon and the Sea of Dragons podcast, and talk about the Dragons fantasy prospects. So let's just go ahead and get to it. All I got to say is that the rules are out. Go check them out right now on the XFL website. And if you're not familiar with them, get familiar with them, because they're going to be the guiding force for this beginning inaugural season for the XFL. So, all right, Brandon Main coming up right now. I am being joined now by Brandon Main. He is the host of the Sea of Dragons podcast, all about the Seattle Dragons. And I'm excited because I've got a subject matter expert in the house, and I got to pick his brain. So Brandon, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you.
All right. Seattle Dragons. First of all, how stoked are you to have a team in Seattle that's an XFL squad?
I'm super excited. We're absolutely fired up. Can't wait for February 8th. As far as the team goes, love the roster, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But I think they've done a wonderful job. I love the staff. I like the coaching staff. Tony Softly, Jim Zorn, the people making the decisions on the draft. I think their draft was very compelling, and it'll shake out in training camp.
Tony is a holdover from the AAF too. I remember following him when the Alliance was in full swing, and he found his footing in the XFL. So good to see him land on his feet.
Yeah, and he's got a long history and track record here in the Northwest in Seattle, and his football roots are pretty strong. And I think he was kind of the, assistant wizard to the draft, and they put together quite a roster.
So Jim Zorn, he's involved how now? Refresh our memories.
Jim Zorn?
Yeah.
Head coach, GM. Jim Zorn was, of course, the Seahawks quarterback in the initial 1976 Seahawks when they started. I grew up watching Jim Zorn. He was a crafty, kind of scrambling, very creative and innovative quarterback, left-hander. You never knew quite who he was going to throw it to and how he was going to throw it. But they put together a lot of really exciting football here in the Northwest. And, he's always kind of had that spirit, a little bit of a gym rat, or at least, playground mentality of playing football. But it's his first time being a head coach and GM where he can actually select his players and coach his players. So Tony Softly, Jim Zorn, Coach Riley, list goes on. I think if you look down at their staff and their coaching staff, their front office, they really do have a unique gathering of talent in Seattle. And I have ideas of where they're going with it, but if I knew who they were going to keep for their final roster, I'd probably be on the staff myself.
Well, that was going to lead to my next thought is that, Jim Zorn as the head coach, as the general manager, does that shape the offense in any sort of direction? Do you think this is going to be of an aggressive offense, or, is this going to take on his personality?
Well, see, it's going to take on his personality, but I think also his career experience. So, he's worked on the Seahawks staff, he's worked quarterbacks, coaches, head coaches, et cetera, in the NFL. But what I see in the overall roster is I see some really skilled players, a lot of fundamentally sound and playmakers, people that exhibit some real physical gifts. And if you look at like Coach Holmgren, who came in here and took the Seahawks to the Super Bowl, that was the flavor for, I think slightly over the decade he was here, is that they were looking for that. And what that brought was like unity, consistency, and other aspects to the team that they never really fell off. They never fell off into doldrums. And, you look at the Seahawks in the 90s, we had some really lean years. And at times we had some really thin rosters. And, excuse me, when you look at the roster of the Dragons, you see that on both sides, all three phases of the ball. You see a lot of veteran leadership. You see a lot of skilled, but also like physically gifted playmakers too. And I'm really excited. I'm really excited for this team.
Well, so then let's take a look at that roster, because we're a fantasy podcast, so we're going to focus on folks that are going to give us fantasy points, and there's no bigger position to do that than the quarterback position. And my initial look at this Seattle quarterback roster, I see a couple of familiar names from times in the AAF and, of course, some Canadian football dabblings, and when you look at a guy like Vijay Daniels and Brandon Silvers, you see some veteran presence, like you said. So just break down a little bit of the quarterback position and what you're seeing so far.
Yeah, let me go to the start of the draft. When I woke up the morning of the draft, and I had a little kind of war room all set up and all that type of stuff to track it. And I saw the allocations, and I caught that Brandon Silvers was coming to Seattle, and my reaction was a smirk on my face. and because I knew him from the Alliance, got to know a lot of his Troy work too, and he was prolific there. But I see someone that he's accurate, he's efficient, he's in some aspects, like going back to the Seahawks, Matt Hasselbeck. You just saw this person that could execute all the throws, was intelligent, but also had a little moxie and a little guts when it came down to it. And you saw that in a few key games and moments when he played for the Express. So I was really happy. I'm like, wow, that's a good start. Okay. And Vijay Daniels, also, again, a Seahawk backup to Russell Wilson for a while here. And before BJ came here, he was actually somebody that was on my personal radar that I thought would be a good person to come in and compete at quarterback for us. So to see him come in now as a Dragon, he's more seasoned. He's a savvy football player, but he also has a really strong skill set. And I felt watching the Alliance that Dennis Erickson, again, another Seattle connection, an old coach for the Seahawks, but I felt like he never got an opportunity, even though there was some turnover going on with the Stallions. And I never quite understood why, because everything I've seen out of BJ, he's also going back to Brandon Silvers. He's intelligent, he's savvy, and he also shows some guts, and he'll try to make that big play. He'll get creative and keep the play active if need be. So, no, I really like our quarterbacks. And then finally to transition, Chase Layton, who came in with minicamp and a little bit late, is, he's a different physical specimen. He's 6'5", 230, but he's got a big arm, and he can be very dangerous with that arm. But you look at, especially like his tape at Marshall, he's very mobile in the pocket. So he stays active in the pocket. He's not just, 3, 4, 5 step drop or whatever and just plant himself. He can move around. So, I mean, at this point, Silvers is the guy. I think Silvers has got the keys to start the engine. If something were to happen, I think we have a makeup of 3 quarterbacks that they're a little bit different, but they're all very compelling. But then we got this whole double forward pass thing. So, what are you going to do with Vijay Daniels and Chase Layton at times? It's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at Litton's stats. I mean, at Marshall, 8,335 passing yards, 72 passing touchdowns. I mean, the guy did well there, which rival BJ Daniels numbers anyways. And you almost got 2 of the same type of players in that role. And I don't know how many they're going to keep, but you got to think that there's going to be a heck of a quarterback battle going into camp.
Yeah. And, there's 3 right now, and I anticipate them keeping 3 as long as these are the 3, just simply because of the double pass. And you have other skill positions that can get involved in that. But if you look at the X's and O's of what a double pass can do, and someone like BJ Daniels or Brandon Silvers that, can play in the backfield, I mean, what does that do to your wildcat and, pistol formations? And it's going to be, I think we're all going to have our eyes really open up the first couple weeks of the season.
Can you imagine a scenario where, let's just say Silvers is out there, Daniels lines up as the up back, and next thing you know, he swings out into the flat, gets a pass from Silvers behind the line of scrimmage, and then uncorks one out to the receiver. Yeah, that's going to be very interesting in the playmaking ability of your offensive coordinator now to have 2 quarterbacks essentially.
Yeah, and you look at that from a flip side. I grew up playing outside linebacker. You look at what the defense, over commitment, over pursuit, all these sort of things, the game's going to have some real nuance to it that we quite haven't seen because of that, because there is that dual threat. You can start heading one way, and even though it's maybe a 7-yard pass to the side, it's going to change momentum and direction of coverage and all sorts of things. So we got to kind of put our seatbelts on for this opening kickoff, I think.
I cannot wait. And I also can't wait to watch the folks that will be in the running back positions, unless, of course, we get a quarterback back there that can throw. Because there, again, is some familiar names on this roster and names that I absolutely adore, and I cannot believe that they are all on one single roster. It's insanity. So break down that running back position for us.
First off, I'll just say amen, because this running back core, and I'm not going to attack other teams, but this has got to be arguably one of the most exciting backfields in the XFL.
It's stacked.
It is. And, Trey Williams and Kenneth Farrow, very, in a way, I mean, of course, they played together with the Commanders, but in a way, similar styles in certain aspects of their game. They're both very capable of run and pass running backs. They're both very explosive. Kenneth Farrow, especially between the tackles, can really bring it. And if you get Trey out in open space, like we've all probably seen him, he's very electric and exciting. Jaquan Gardner is kind of a sleeper, I think, in some people's eyes, because you have Trey and Kenneth drafted first. But Gardner is very dangerous, and his low gravity. I mean, the guy's 5'5", 200 pounds, and if you watched him, I grew up watching a lot of football, and the first time I saw him, my eyes said, he looks like Maurice Jones-Drew, or as we used to call him, Mojo D. And he's so low to the ground, and he's so strong and stout, but his feet are. And this is what separates him, I think, from other running backs, maybe of that stature. But his feet, they not only constantly move, but his feet are quick. So he's a super exciting running back. And then Lavon Coleman, who, is a graduate of the University of Washington Huskies here in the Northwest, and he also brings a lot of dangerous abilities to the backfield. I love the size speed combo with him, and he's got really plus vision too. If you've watched him, or if you go back and look at some of the game tape, you get him off the edge, and he's shifty. But I can say that about all four of these running backs, so it's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard pressed for me as a coach to look at any one of these guys and say, yeah, you're not going to be on the roster this year, because again, they're all studs. And I remember when Trey Williams started to come on toward the end of the AAF run. I mean, he was one of those guys in the later weeks that just all of a sudden, everybody was ready for Kenneth Farrow. And I remember it made fantasy owners just pull their hair out, because you rostered Kenneth Farrow and you got Trey Williams all of a sudden. And it was rough.
Truth be told, I had Trey Williams on my roster.
Of course you did.
Yeah, they all of them. I'm so sold on the draft picks that I'm like, you keep all four. It's football. You keep all four. You've got four very strong, capable people that can come in at any point and make an impact. So, no, I love our running backs for sure.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's one of those situations where you just can't go wrong rostering. But now, so as from a fantasy standpoint, if I'm looking at this running back situation, not only am I confused and confounded as to who to draft in this rotation, who do you think is that number one guy, or do you think this is going to be a situation where we're going to get three-headed monster and pray that one of them goes off on a given week?
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that one, because I think that you will lead with, you'll see them lead with Trey Williams and Kenneth Farrow, partially because offensive coach coordinator Riley, these were his backs in San Antonio, and it really works. But I think that I really expect the Seattle Dragons offense to be a little creative, and gosh, off the top of my head, maybe like a Patriots type, where there might be a little committee there, but I see them using the running backs as specialists. But I mean, at this point, I think Trey Williams, Kenneth Farrow, maybe 1 and 2, from a fantasy point of view. But don't be afraid on Gardner or Coleman. Coleman might be the type that you're going to probably just keep your eyes on. I don't think you want to keep your eyes, especially like if you're drafting on a non-weekly basis. If you're drafting for the season, I think that you're going to want to get Gardner on your roster.
Yeah, so, and that too, from a receiving standpoint. I mean, again, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I was just saying, but don't sleep on Coleman either. So we're going to. Unfortunately, with the Dragons, we're going to have to kind of see it shake out in the first couple weeks.
Yeah, and Jaquan Gardner as a receiver too. That's the one that I think if you're going to have any sort of fantasy value, if you're going to play in a PPR league, or if one of these DFS sites picks up that has PPR, Jaquan Gardner's probably got the better hands of the set of running backs, and I think he might be more valuable there than maybe some of the others.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, a slight edge. I would say I know that Trey Williams makes some big plays, and Farrell's very capable. But yeah, it honestly, to summarize, I think the running backs, there's going to be a little bit of the roll of the dice on these guys. They're all very capable, but we don't know. We don't know how much they're going to get rolled out. So yeah, but there's a lot of talent there, and there's a lot of fantasy value in that backfield.
It's so frustrating these weeks before the season starts that you don't even know. You're saying to yourself, yeah, I think that, and then once the first week of the season, it's all out the door. And then even as we saw in the AAF, 2 weeks into the season, you could forget everything and you just have to go all over it again.
Fantasy owners have to be prepared with the kickoff of XFL. Some of us are going to take their lumps, and it's going to be early and often. So there's going to be a lot shaken out for sure.
That's okay. I'm all right. I'll roll with those, and I hope that the fans of this show will roll with it too. But here's a position where we got to really roll the dice, because tight end is one of those positions that, boy, even in the NFL, you just have to either go with them or not. So I see a lot of names, but I'm only seeing a couple that I think could turn the needle for us.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So yeah, with tight ends, I think Evan Rodriguez is got to be on the top of the list from a fantasy perspective. He's smaller, more athletic. He's quite a vertical weapon. He's a sound blocker. He's a capable blocker. But he is a passing threat, and he's very good in the red zone. So the other thing, if you watched Alliance, I can't remember offhand how many 2-point conversions, but I know he had at least a couple. Now that we're going to be going for it, pretty much every extra point, I think he's somebody, because he is very talented in the red zone. I think he's got to be the top of the radar. The other four, Cam Clear, Colin Jeter, Connor Hamlet, and Ben Johnson, they're all roughly 6'4" to 6'5". Connor's 6'7". They're good size, athletic, fundamentally sound, going back to how they drafted this team. Smart, capable blockers, plus blockers, etc. And the other four are, I don't know what they're going to do. I've gotten to know most of these players pretty well, looking at game tape, watching some of their games, that sort of thing. But I honestly don't. That's one of the positions on this roster that I'm really curious to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, and then of course, how many are going to make the final roster? How are they going to be used? I mean, you're right. There's just so much at the tight end position that's one of those ones where you kind of just, I don't know, pray and hope that you get a good pick when you pick one.
Yeah, and I'm intrigued by their tight ends. I will say that Connor Hamlet, he played for the Hot Shots. He's got the size, but he also flashes as a red zone target. And if you look at the college and game tape on all these guys, they're all capable, so not to say anything against them. But Connor Hamlet, like they say, they can't teach size. Extra 2 inches, he has a massive reach. He's someone to kind of keep an eye on in this competition for sure too.
All right, so we'll move off of tight ends, because the wide receiver position is one where, as we've talked about in the other positions with quarterback and running back, there's a lot of names that people are going to recognize. There's not a lot of names, household names, anyways, when you look up and down the Seattle wide receiver chart. So we're going to have to spend a little bit of time getting to know these guys, yeah?
Yeah, there's some that jump out to me. I mean, we have some Northwest connections, have Kason Williams, who also was a UW Husky and a Seattle Seahawk, and he was with the Browns, and I believe another team or two, but I got to know him with the Seahawks. He had a fantastic preseason with the Seahawks, and he ended up not making the roster at the final cuts, and it actually left the Seahawks fan base pretty stirred because, I mean, he was lights out. And I think the reason why he was so good is his skill set fit the offensive scheme. And I don't, when he moved on, the opportunities and that didn't quite work out the way I think he was clicking in Seattle. But he is someone to definitely watch, not only from, possession receiving, but he's got plus body control. He's got great hands. He's a very solid route runner, and he's a total touchdown and red zone threat. He's got he makes great adjustments to the football. And I think you got to put him up there. Their first overall pick at the position was Fred Ross out of Mississippi State. He's also done some returning, so he's got some return capabilities. I'm curious if he lands in that position. But he is very exciting to me. I'm going to put him up there not because he was picked number one. You look at his tape, though. He's fast, he's strong, he's smooth, he's got really good hands and plus awareness. Like he's very aware of his movements. Like once he gets the ball, he's decisive. He's got really strong cuts. Guy's a playmaker, and I think that you got to put a highlighter on his name because Fred Ross, I can't wait. I'm really intrigued by this guy. I can't wait to see what happens on the offense with him.
So you're looking right now, you said Fred Ross is somebody to look at, and then Kason Williams is the next. So those are a couple of names to keep in your bank. I'm also seeing guys like Austin Proehl. He was with the Buffalo Bills for a hot second, right? He got drafted 7th there. Any other guys that sort of make the radar for you?
Yeah. In fact, again, I'm going to go back to it. All these guys on the roster, I'm really intrigued with this batch too. Let me break it down in maybe the skill set. So you mentioned Austin Proehl, who again is someone I could talk about. I really am intrigued by him. Keenan Reynolds, Austin Proehl, John Santiago, and Ruben. I think it's Muela out of Idaho. And Ruben actually is really hard. I've had a hard time finding much game tape on him and information. But all 4 of those guys, they are both either 5'9" or 5'10", and they're from 170 to 190. And Keenan Reynolds, we got to know up here. He was a Seahawk, Navy. He's just a fantastic little football player. Like, he's smart, great hands, possession type receiver with playmaking abilities. And I think out of those 4, John Santiago, some of the best tape I've seen scouting players. This guy is really exciting out of North Dakota. All 4 of those guys in that skill set, I got to think that maybe they take 2 out of 4. I'm not sure how they're going to concoct their roster, but I think 2 out of 4 will end up on the roster. I think Keenan Reynolds, because of his veteran experience and his abilities, I think he's going to find his way in the top 4. I think he's that type of possession underneath playmaker that's going to be a really good fit in the offense, but also kind of a safety valve for the quarterback. He's the type of guy that he's pretty savvy. I like him a lot. So you look at those 4 guys, and then kind of outside that box, you got Jalen Roll. You have Micah Holder out of San Diego State, and you have Corey Robertson, and you have Tyree Brady, who is out of Marshall, and he's a recent addition to the roster. And then you get into that kind of 6-foot plus range up to Brady, who's 6'3", and you start looking at these guys, and what I name about 3, 4, 5 there. So out of 1, 2, 3, 4. So out of those guys, I think that, again, you're maybe looking at 2 of those guys. I'm intrigued by all of them. Corey Robertson, who's had a Southern Mississippi, he's big play. He's a touchdown threat. He's strong. He's 6'2", 212. Brady out of Marshall is 6'3", 210, and he's long, rangy, huge catch radius, and a huge big downfield catcher. So it's and I like Holder. I think Holder's kind of an X factor. You look at his game tape out of San Diego State, and he's a real kind of go-to type of playmaker. And then Jalen Rull, who's out of Air Force, I think he's going to probably be. I think he's maybe the prospect that's going to work his way into the fourth spot. But again, at this point, you're anybody's guess is as good as mine.
Yeah.
Let me say one last thing though. Malachi Jones. When we drafted Malachi Jones, I kind of came up out of my seat on that one because I covered him in the arena this past season, and when we drafted him, Malachi's a special talent, but unfortunately, he signed with the CFL Montreal. But because we have this really intriguing depth, I think the Dragons are going to be just fine. But that was a big loss. Malachi was, I was surprised that he went so late in the draft, and I was ecstatic that he was drafted by the Dragons. Yeah,
it's so crazy because he lit it up. I mean, obviously in the Arena League he was the MVP, and the guy just he was the overall MVP. He was huge. He was lighting everybody up, and yeah, the Alouettes definitely got themselves a good one. I hope they know that.
Yeah, I think they do. So yeah, and Malachi lit it up for 2 years in the Arena. His first year was just as impressive. So
Rookie of the Year, yeah.
Yeah, and he played for the Atlanta Legends too, and I think he would have been a great fit. But no, absolutely best of luck to him, and I think he's gonna light it up north.
So, we talked about Keenan Reynolds real quick, and I want to go back to him because with the academy experience that he had, first of all, you're right about the leadership. He's obviously, a naval officer, so he definitely can lead. But more than that, I mean, he ran the ball a lot because he was, kind of the quarterback, and when you're a quarterback in the triple option, all you do is run. So now that he's a receiver, that jet sweep motion is what you're looking for. And that'd be a perfect thing to do as well for, a little pitch up front, because a pitch counts as a forward pass. Well, guess what? Now you're pitching to a guy that's played quarterback position before, and now he can throw the ball down the field too.
Yeah. That type of stuff. Are we going to see jet sweeps with 2 forward throws? There's going to be some new dimensions, and you have to look, if you're following your team specifically, or if you're studying teams, you have to look at the whole roster, and you got to dig in and find out who these players are. Do they have return experience? Do they have quarterback or running back experience? Like John Santiago was a running back. He's a convert to a wide receiver, but what are they going to use him as if he makes the roster? So no, it's. Before we come to some conclusion, we have to dig in and do some research, because we're all going to get educated here real soon.
Oh yeah, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen sooner rather than later, because they're kicking off here just in we're a little over a month away now, aren't we?
We're down to days here, pretty much.
Oh,
we're at weeks. It's days. It's coming.
All right. So listen, we've covered most of the skill positions, which is what everybody's going to focus on especially once we get into the DFS. But just a little taste of defense, just because I don't know what the defensive world is going to shape up to be in DFS or in season long. So if we're paying attention to defense, where would you say this defense falls if you really had to speculate? Would it be in the top half of the league or the bottom half, or where would you put this defense, do you think?
Well, I recently did an interview with Anthony Johnson, and who is a draft pick of the Dragons, a defensive lineman. And we were talking about veteran leadership, and I brought it up, and I said it was one of the first things I noticed after the draft. I was catching on to it through the draft, of course, but I looked at the draft picks, and I started looking at the roster. And I'm like, that defense has a lot of veteran leadership. And Anthony touched on that in our conversation. But there's a number of seasoned veteran leaders on that, from, Big Will Sutton on the line to Steven Johnson, linebacker, and the list kind of goes on from there. There's a lot of savvy, smart, intelligent, and again, seasoned defenders. I think that the Dragons are going to be in that Jim Zorn mold that he's trying to create, fundamentally sound, balanced, smart, and I think that they're going to be trying to play. I think they're going to be trying to play a style of defense that should put them up at least in the middle of the pack. And they have some playmakers. The defensive backfield is really talented. Some of them are young. Some of them have some veteran leadership as well. But no, I'm really excited for the defense. I think this defense could be really crafty, and I think this defense could be pretty strong come kickoff. So no, I think that they're going to make their plays, but they might not be too easy to score on. So we'll see.
Outstanding. Man, we have covered a lot of stuff tonight. I sure hope that everybody appreciates what we've covered tonight, because the Dragons, they do have a pretty stacked roster, and I really feel like for fantasy purposes, it's one that a lot of people are going to go to early, and maybe a lot of fantasy drafts will center around the Dragons roster. But I sure do appreciate your expertise and your breakdown of these players, because again, I mean, I'm one thing, but you actually have followed this team for a lot longer than I have, and most of the people that listen to this have. So I'm so glad that you were able to go in depth and willing to go in depth with us.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm super fired up, and I hope that the way that things shake out, that fantasy players are going to the Dragons early and often.
I agree. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Brandon Main. He is the host of the Sea of Dragons podcast. Please, sir, pitch your podcast and tell everybody where they can find it.
So you can find our podcast on you can find our podcast on Podbean and Spotify right now. We will have it up on Google and Apple Podcasts soon. We cover a lot of the action through our main Twitter feed, which is at XFL_endzone. And our podcast for XFL Endzone is at Sea of Dragons Pod on Twitter.
That's right. Sea of Dragons podcast. Make sure you check it out. It is one of the many growing XFL podcasts that you're going to want to go to each and every week. Brandon, thank you for taking time to come on the show, and appreciate the work.
Hey, appreciate your work too. Thanks, Rod.
Mission complete. Episode 2 is in the books. I thoroughly enjoyed doing it this way. I'm so glad to bring somebody else on that knows the team better than I do. And it just certainly helps you. It helps me. And I'm sure that it helps them to flesh all of this stuff out. So huge thanks to Brandon. Sea of Dragons podcast. First episode is out now. Check it out. They'll be coming out with episodes every week, as far as I know, or at least, as much as they can. And boy, I tell you, that's going to be great content. Keep an eye on them. They are going places, obviously, with that Dragons podcast and that Dragons media world. So great stuff, great content. I am absolutely loving the energy right now of the XFL media community, and I can't wait to jump in deeper and to have all of us just get together. So next week, I am on the hunt for an LA Wildcats personality to come on the show. Talk LA Wildcats with me, because we got to go right down west a little bit more, south of me. But we're going to do that. So again, man, this is exciting. Rebrand XFL Fantasy Central. So we're going to cover everything from now here on out as far as fantasy concerned. Oh, by the way, Alt Fantasy Sports about to roll out their XFL leagues. So keep an eye out on Alt Fantasy Sports. It's altfantasysports.com. They will have the leagues there, folks. You'll be able to draft your league, start your league, and get that stuff going. So we are going to have a listener league. I promise you that. So once Alt Fantasy Sports actually announces that it's out, I will announce the listener league. We've already got one member. So I already promised the first membership to somebody, so we're going to have that happen, and it's exciting stuff to actually be close enough to play fantasy football in the XFL. So like I said, keep an eye on Alt Fantasy Sports. You can also follow them on Twitter, search them up too. They'll probably let you know when it's happening. But until then, man, I need to think of a new way to get out of this. So I'll think of a new way to say goodbye. But until next week, when we have more great content coming for you, I just can't wait. I cannot wait. So, all right, we're out. We'll see you next week.